Good morning once again. Welcome to slide 4 of self-reliance. Please go back to the basics of Unitarianism, individualism, Calvinism, etc., wherever you feel the need. In slide 3, we mentioned two initial phases of Emersonian self-reliance. One is the need to understand the creativity and the genuine flashes of thoughts that every individual gets and not to ignore them. Second is to trust oneself, which is the precursor to non-conformity. He says imitation is suicide. Moving on, do remember that Emerson was always a striking figure in the intellectual life of America and that his discourses were always inspiring. Through them, many were induced to strive for a higher self-culture. But that doesn't mean he was free of criticism. For example, Carlyle formulates the defects of the poetic and literary productions of Emerson when he says, I quote from Carlyle, "For me, he is too ethereal and speculative, theoretic. I will have all things condense themselves, take shape and body if they are to have my sympathy." Here, unquote. Ethereal means unearthly, which means not in the ways of the world. Or maybe you can call it as something that is not practical. I go to that quote once again. For me, he is too ethereal or unearthly, speculative and theoretic. I will have all things condense themselves, take shape and body if they are to have my sympathy, unquote. So as you read through the essay, please keep your mind and brain open to a critical analysis too. Continuing from where we stopped in slide 3, he asks the individuals to trust themselves, reminding us that the integrity of our mind is too sacred to be ignored and that society quite often demands conformity. In the essay he says, I open the quote, "It is easy to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude." Unquote. This brings up the challenges in being a non-conformist. He says, quote again, "For non-conformity, the world whips you with its displeasure." Unquote. Besides this displeasure of the world, Emerson states other problems too. I open the quote once again. "The other terror that scares us from self-trust is our consistency, a reverence for a past act or word because the eyes of others have no other data for computing our orbit than our past acts, and we are loath to disappoint them." Unquote. I repeat the quote once again. "The other terror that scares us from self-trust is our consistency, a reverence for our past act or word because the eyes of others have no other data for computing our orbit than our past acts, and we are loath to disappoint them." Unquote. With assertive statements, Emerson strongly asks if it is bad to be misunderstood. Now, to prove this, he looks at many great men from history. I begin the quote. "Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood." Unquote. Bringing out these great names and their genuine thoughts which gained acceptance as wisdom later, Emerson states, open the quote again, "I suppose no man can violate his nature. All the sallies of his will are rounded in by the law of his being, as the inequalities of Andes and Himalaya are insignificant in the curve of the sphere." Unquote. Now, Andes and Himalaya are the names of two great mountain ranges in the world. Andes is a great mountain range system of South America, and Himalaya, the great mountain system of Asia. Now, Both these mountains are great by themselves. They are not of the same size, not of the same structure, not even of the same material. But he says the inequalities of Andes and Himalaya are insignificant in the curve of the sphere. So here he may be trying to connect the concept of differences and individuality to the process of thinking. We all need not be the same. So, all these point to the concept of individualism, which was one of the key intellectual heights of Emerson. The essay is rich in assertive statements like, I quote again, "We pass for what we are. Character teaches above our wills. Men imagine that they communicate their virtue or vice only be over overt actions and do not see that virtue or vice emit a breath every moment." Unquote. And there are other lines that must captivate you. Quote, "Your genuine action will explain itself and will explain your other genuine actions. Your conformity explains nothing. Act singly, and what you have already done singly will justify you now. Greatness appeals to the future." Now, analyzing the flow of his thoughts, you can say that he begins the essay with a focus on what is latent and invisible. Latent means what is hidden and what cannot be seen. And then Emerson moves on to say that as soon as the self is understood as representational consciousness, as the image wherein we appear to and speak ourselves, the largest portion of our activity will become unconscious. I'll repeat that. This may be taken as the essence of the essay. Beginning the essay with a focus on what is latent and invisible, which means the spark of genius which is present in every one of us but not identified, and we are not bold enough to be loud to state that genius inside. Beginning the essay with a focus on this latent and the invisible, Emerson moves on to say that as soon as the self is understood as representational consciousness, as the image wherein we appear to and speak ourselves, the largest portion of our activity will become unconscious. So, the crux of the essay may be Emerson's desire for intellectual and moral independence. However, it has to be mentioned that America has a love-hate relationship with individualism. Many view individualism as a corrosive force that undermines democracy. At the same time, there are many aspects of individualism that most Americans value deeply, seeing them as essential to a democratic society and to a society that provides opportunities for individuals to cultivate their potential. Keeping these in mind, read through the first 6 pages of the essay and identify the assertive statements Emerson makes on individualism in self-reliance. Think of a few arguments that must have come up against these assertions or his defense on self-reliance. Happy reading, stay healthy, stay safe.